Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the St. Louis podcast. We are back this week. My name is Eric Brown, president of iMedia and partner at Mogul Holdings. Today is a solo episode. A lot to talk about. I've been gone, out of town. I was out of town like 10 days out in California. That's why, of course, we didn't have a podcast last week. The first week, I believe, and let's see, 88 weeks that we have skipped a podcast episode. And I was going to find a place to record in California. I was going to bring a mic and try and record on the beach. Didn't happen. It obviously did not happen. And usually we have, at least one or two backup episodes, if you will, that's not time sensitive that we can go ahead and push out. But of course, we did not have that as well. So here we are. So, a lot to talk about in technology, in obviously news, obviously Trump winning. But first, let's talk about the trip to California real quick. So, what was it? Wednesday of 2 weeks ago. So that would be whatever date that is. And go to LA. And the whole plan of this trip is to essentially drive the Pacific Coast Highway from LA all the way up to Jedediah Smith. We'll see. Well, really, we just saw how far north we could get and then drive back. And not only drive back, but drive back to an event in in Newport Beach, which is south of LA, and then drive to San Diego for an event there. So pretty much drove literally all of California there and back. So I was in the car for an unbelievable amount of time, but it was well worth it. So Wednesday we fly into LA. The first place I always like to stop is Venice Beach because we're going north anyways. I always stop at what's this place called? Greenleaf Kitchen. It's right there. And of course, since you're in LA, you got to stop in at a dispensary too, right? You're taking it. It's a long road trip, a lot of driving, a lot of cool stuff to see. Got to pick up something. So we do that, drive all the way up to Paso Robles, which I think it was like a 5 or 6 hour drive from LAX that day. So drive up to Paso Robles. Of course, where Big Sur is in that area on the one is completely closed still. It's been that way for a couple of years. And actually, on our way to Paso Robles, I believe it was at the next day. That was the next day that we saw the mountain fire in Ventura, and that was absolutely crazy how much damage that was doing. So we get to Paso Robles, I'm the king of finding some of the best restaurants. I don't know how. I go on Reddit, I go on some of the local subreddits, and then of course I go to Google after that, not vice versa. And usually you can find some amazing spots, especially if you listen to the locals, which of course, as we well know, usually they'll point you in the right direction. So I had a good time in Paso Robles, woke up, had some wine, and then went driving. We drove all the way the next day, like I said, through the fire in maybe that was the first day. Whichever day it was, the first day of driving, I think we went through the fire. So we get to Paso Robles. The second day, we drive all the way past San Francisco up to where we're at. We were a little bit like north of the Napa area, up there north of Santa Rosa, Windsor. So Santa Rosa, stay in Santa Rosa, get there late as hell, using my parents' points at one of their timeshare properties. And let me tell you, I check in. It's like 8 or 9 o'clock. It's late. We're all tired. We want to go get some food because we really haven't eaten that much that day. And lo and behold, they try and pitch me into an hour-long meeting talking about timeshare points and why to buy them. And if you know me personally, um, you know, people our age know that timeshares are essentially a scam now. Of course, in the past, when my parents bought them, whatever, 40 years ago, maybe they were a better idea, but now it's just bullshit. And pretty much told the sales guy that, and he was like, we're not salespeople anymore. We're customer service representatives. We're just trying to get you blah, 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 blah. And goes on for 10 or 15 minutes just to get these wristbands I need to go to the pool that we didn't even use in the first place. But such an annoying process. It's like, dude, just trying to go to the room. It's 8 o'clock at night. Give it a break. I'm not interested. And as a salesperson, when someone tells you they're not interested multiple times in a row, just take their word for it. Um, I'm not your prospect. So we get there. The next day is incredible in Santa Rosa. We stayed in Alexander Valley, went to Silver Oak, went to Alexander Valley Vineyards. I mean, we went to a ton of places that day, and then we end up in Halesburg, which is an amazing area. There's like 30 or 40 different wine tasting rooms and a ton of good restaurants. So that day was awesome. The next day, time to leave. So then that next day, literally what we do is we drive all the way from Santa Rosa north. And I forgot to say actually the day that we drove up to San Francisco, we stopped at Monterey, stopped at Carmel, 19 Mile, drove by Pebble Beach, drove by what's the other golf course out there? Uh Whatever it is. Cypress Point, Pebble Beach, Spyglass. I mean, beautiful area out there in Carmel and Monterey. Highly recommend stopping there. Literally, stopped at like this tasting place on the top of a market right there in Monterey, and they had binoculars, and you can see like sea lions and bunch of different cool stuff sitting right there as you had fresh fish was which was absolutely amazing. So anyways, Santa Rosa, then we drive all the way up so far. We drove so far that day. Go past Fort Bragg, Glass Beach, stop a bunch of times, and we get as far north as Klamath by Crescent City. Super small town, literally nothing there. Stay at the Requa Inn, which was beautiful. Airbnb, had some great wine there as well. And that was a super long drive. Drove through a bunch of the redwoods at night, but the whole goal of this trip was to drive north, go through Monterey, go through Carmel, go through San Francisco, stop at wine country, see the Golden Gate Bridge. I've really never been north of LA, so a lot of that was new. I've sort of been in Santa Barbara area once before, but that was only for a day. So let me tell you, I'm a hiking guy, I'm a camping guy. I didn't really get to do much this year, which is sad, and I got to experience some amazing things on this trip. California is straight up beautiful. I mean, don't get me wrong, Missouri, St. Louis has its qualities, but it's great out there. I will say stuff's expensive, obviously, of course. I couldn't deal with some of the traffic that LA and San Diego and San Francisco deals with. Makes 270 and 40 and 44 traffic here look like nothing. I think we moved it took us about 3 mile, or it took us about an hour to go 3 miles in San Diego. Anyway, so we stay there, Requa Inn. The next day is just us driving through Jedediah, Smith, National Woods, Redwood State Park, excuse me. They have this road, like 15 or 20-mile road that takes you through. It's like a dirt road, one path. Um, and pretty much all cars can handle it. Just take it slow. It's not too bad. It's amazing. Some of these trees up here, how tall they are. They've been around for literally thousands of years. And I know some of those redwoods, at least as far as they've been there, they've been there for potentially millions of years, which is absolutely crazy. Not the trees, but obviously past trees, right? The area has held them for apparently millions of years. So go there. Next day, drive. We get as far back south as we could driving. Stop again at a lot of the places along the beach. We get all the way back to, I believe, almost Santa Rosa. We're staying a little bit, Sebastopol, and stay there. The next day is us driving south because, of course, we got to get back, right? Got to get back to the LA area. We stop at Point Reyes. We have along the one there, Bodega Bay, Point Reyes. They had some of the best fresh oysters I ever had in my life, and they were actually, let me see if I can find Hog Island Oyster Company, and it's literally right off the bay. It's right off the one right there. They had just opened. It was 11 o'clock, and it was absolutely amazing. Looks like they actually have a couple different locations, but I was at the one literally, yeah, Marshall, it looks like Hog Island Oyster Farm. So it was at the farm. I got to see them, take all of the oysters out of whatever these metal cages were that they were using to fish. Literally from that morning, had some baked, had some fresh oysters. People in St. Louis don't like oysters, and I don't get it, but it is what it is. People are like, "You mean that snot?" It's like, no, I mean that amazing thing from the ocean or the bay that tastes absolutely incredible. Yes, I am talking about that. So talk there, uh, go all the way to back through San Francisco. Where did we? Where did we even try and get back to that day? All these days mixed together. I think we made it back to Paso Robles that day. Yeah, that's right. Long drive south all the way back to Paso Robles. Stayed there up and early out of there. Stopped in Pismo Beach, Avila Beach, Morro Bay. Looked at those areas. Absolutely incredible. And then back south, back to Newport Beach. Had an event that night, made it in time. Had an event that next day, left that following evening, drove all the way to San Diego. Uh, Hung out that evening in San Diego. San Diego's an incredible town. Might be my favorite city, if you will, um, in California. As far as it coming to San Francisco, LA, and San Diego. LA would definitely be my last choice. Could never sit there and deal every day with all that traffic. Unless, of course, I guess I didn't drive very far or worked pretty close, but then what's the point of living in that beautiful area if you can't drive around it? So San Diego stayed right there at the Bay Gaslight District. Again, had some incredible food. Had incredible food in Eureka, California, which is a small town north of Klamath at Sea Grill. Just some of the best food on this trip and the most random spots that you could imagine. It really puts I don't know, just puts St. Louis food to shame. Just some of the interesting stuff I had. San Diego, stay there, have an event the next day at Stone Brewing, right there, like Liberty Station, Point Loma area. Even though planes were taking off like every 10 minutes, the Liberty Station area is actually pretty cool area. Um, Stone Brewing is huge. There's like a little shopping district. There's a ton of different restaurants and things in there. So it's definitely a cool spot to hang out. And then again, of course, went over to the fish market in San Diego, sat there, talked to the bartender, and had some, again, fresh fish. All around, great trip. Great trip. And now we're back. I already missed the weather. I already missed the beach, smell of the ocean. Now we're back in St. Louis. And now we have so much news to cover. I mean, where do we even start here? Let's start with this. So, I'm sure you guys are beat a dead horse here now, but let's talk about this. How 5 key demographic groups voted in 2024. This is by the AP. So, most Trump voters were white, a trend that continued from 2020, but also up here it says where did it say that? It's like 6 out of 10 voters are white. 8 and 10 Trump voters in this election were white, roughly in line with 2020. About 2/3 of Harris voters were white, and that largely matched President Joe Biden's coalition in the last election. White voters made up a bulk of the voting electorate in the United States and did not shift their support significantly at the national level compared to 2020. A majority of white voters cast their ballot for Trump, unchanged from last election. About 4 in 10 white voters backed Harris, which is about the same as Biden. White voters were also more likely to support Trump over Harris and Biden in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, even though Trump lost those states in 2020. So, few key things. Trump's share of black voters rose slightly, driven largely by younger men. Trump was able to make slight inroads with black voters nationally, who make up 10% of the voters across the country. Nationally, about 8 in 10 black voters supported Harris. That was down from 9 in 10. So 10% decrease is pretty significant. Trump doubled his share of young black men, like I just said, which helped him among key demographic voting group. About 3 in 10 black men under the age of 45 went for Trump, roughly double the number he got in 2020. Slightly more Hispanic voters for Trump. Narrow gains, actually, with women as well. Trump benefited with narrow gains among both men and women. Harris had the advantage among young women, winning 53% to Trump's 46%. But that margin was somewhat narrower than Biden's. Biden won 55% of women, while 43 went for Trump. Trump saw a modest increase in men. The shifts by gender were concentrated at young voters as well, Black and Latino voters. So, I mean, a lot of positives for Trump. And I will say, it is interesting because it seems like, you read the news. I will say this entire corporate marketing plan against Trump did not work. Obviously, what he won the popular vote by 3 million, 3.5 million. It just goes to show also that apparently they didn't rig the election in 2020, or they weren't able to this year with the amount of support for Trump and really the lack thereof support for Kamala, which I think is arguably even more important. And it's crazy because we always associate, which is a stupid association, and maybe it's been true in the past and largely true, especially with blacks usually voting obviously on the Democratic side, that it didn't seem like, her being black had any help in this election, especially for the black electorate, which is interesting, because all of the exit polls, I mean, nothing was showing, obviously, what we saw from this election. And, there's some other interesting things as well, going on here. Obviously, I've read a couple comments. There's always a reaction to zoom into the politics of a country to understand why an outcome has occurred, but it's important to zoom out a bit and look at global reaction to high inflation post COVID. Incumbent parties are getting thrashed everywhere, and not just here. UK, New Zealand, Japan, Australia, Canada, and Germany. I messed up my notes here. That's why I can't read. Incumbents are unpopular. It was a bad time to run as an incumbent party globally. I mean, she lost all the swing states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and of course the popular votes. The Democrats also lost the Senate and the House. Um, I read it. So that's the first time that Democrats have lost the popular vote in 20 years, and it was by a significant margin. And I brought up the fact in the past, it's like, why don't we just have the popular vote? The argument for the Republicans for the last 20 years has been they'll never win an election again. And I brought this up to Democrats as well, and they don't want to get rid of it either, which makes no sense because, of course, that would mean for the last 20 years they would have won every election. So, and I think if we went to the way of a popular vote, there are a lot of people in a lot of states right now that don't vote one way or the other. Let's just say if you're in a highly conservative state or you're a highly liberal state, right? You're in California and you're conservative, you have a less, even though obviously you're not only voting for president, right? You're also voting for a lot of your state representatives. We had governor, we had senators, we had the treasurer, we had secretary of state. I mean, all of that stuff on there. But obviously, a lot of people don't even look into that stuff. They're just like, hey, who are you voting for president? And if you're in those states because of the Electoral College, your vote for the president, if you look at it, essentially does not matter, right? So if California, say, gets 5 million votes for Kamala and 2 million for Trump, right? It's like you're one of the 1 million in California that would have voted for Trump. Who cares? It's not going to change the Electoral College. It's not going to change the electoral vote of California for the president, and vice versa. Same thing goes in conservative states as well, right? And I think it'd be interesting to see how that would play out. Obviously, everyone still says the majority of people are stupid and don't know what they're voting for. I mean, it's always been that way, right? That's why we originally had the Electoral College, was number one to for them to retain control, right? I think at the end of the day, they never wanted to put it in the hands fully of the people. But number two, I mean, you didn't have access to information back in the day, right? You'd have farmers. I mean, shit, you couldn't even talk to people. You'd have, horses giving male. So, there's no way for a person to actually know what was going on. So you had an electorate that was supposed to, obviously, do things on your behalf. And it's pretty apparent it doesn't really work that way anymore. And I just think it would be interesting to see the popular vote become the thing that actually matters. Because why do we even care about the popular vote, right? It's like, all right, Dems won for the last 20 years. Why do we care? Doesn't matter when it comes to who actually is going to be the president. So my question is, why does it care? Make it the popular vote, see what happens. It's pretty apparent that a lot of the Republicans that had a lot of worry in, removing the electoral college have nothing to worry about after this last election. Supposedly, we'll see what happens, right? I mean, the Dems lost, pretty big here in this last election, which again is surprising based off a lot of the rhetoric, based off obviously corporate media, which you can see is absolutely losing control now. You had companies that were calling him Hitler now, obviously wanting to interview him afterwards. Afterwards when it's insane. It's like that's as sad as it is. That's why people like to see Trump and JD Vance and these other people go on these podcasts, right? Go on. Obviously, everyone says Joe Rogan, but they went on a bunch of different podcasts and these different mediums to be able to sit down and talk intelligently or not intelligently, but at least you can get through and see bullshit when it comes to an hour and a half, 2 hour, 3 hour long conversation with the person. Whereas, you know, Joe even said it. He offered to have Kamala on, and her requisite was go to DC or wherever, and you only have 45 minutes, right? And it's like, that's not the goal of his podcast. That's not what the Joe Rogan experience is, right? So, it is just interesting, and it doesn't matter anymore. But honestly, I don't think that. I think there's a reason she didn't go on it because it wouldn't have went well regardless. If she did, it's probably better to stay off, right? So we have this, right? So then, all of these cabinet picks are starting to come out, which I find very interesting because I thought, again, I don't know a ton about politics, right? But I've been reading about some of these cabinet picks, and it seems like some of these are potentially worrisome. I don't know if worrisome is the right word, but I would say potentially some of these are worrisome. And I was seeing some good comments about, essentially what the issue is and how this is going on, but just very interesting. So let's go into it. So some of these cabinet positions that they're picking, let's just talk about Matt Gaetz real quick because I mean he's on the topic of conversation, right? Republicans were on the defensive about two of President-elect Donald Trump's controversial cabinet picks. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson said on CNN State of the Union that a House Ethics Committee investigation into Trump's pick for Attorney General and staunch Trump loyalist Matt Gaetz should not be revealed. The Justice Department investigated sex trafficking allegations against Gates. The investigation ended without charges, but the Ethics Committee, continued to look into the allegation he assaulted a 17-year-old. An attorney of Pete Hegseth, Trump's choice for Secretary of Defense, told multiple outlets that Hegseth paid a woman who accused him of sexual assault in 2017 because he feared losing his job at Fox News. Hegseth has denied the sexual assault allegation and was never charged. However, he paid the woman as part of a settlement arrangement that included a confidentiality provision after she threatened litigation in 2020, the attorney told media outlets. All right. So we got Matt Gaetz, right? This guy's an interesting character. And what I do find interesting is this. It seems like his sexual inclusivities, just like a ton of people in politics, a ton of people in power, we could go through a list. It's absolutely insane the amount of people that are linked to some sort of sexual assault, trafficking, underage things. with powers that be inside non-corporate, corporate politics. It's absolutely amazing. And I really frankly don't understand it. Um, it's almost like you have everything. Well, what can you get next? It's disgusting. So it's hard for me to justify having anyone with this kind of background being put forward, um, to obviously be a part of, uh, cabinet appointees, which is absolutely crazy. So who knows there? It's hard to say. But I will say on the flip side, Matt Gaetz provides an interesting turn of events. I've heard him talk on, some podcasts on and also on his show just about some political conflicts going on in countries where it seems like for some reason he has a good idea of what's going on in those areas with national intelligence and of course can't share some of those things, but he's been proven to be right on a few of these interesting issues that have gone in other countries. It seems like his Ukraine thing, and Ukraine's such a big topic now, but it seems like the voters have made it pretty clear that one of the reasons they didn't vote for Kamala is because she's a war hawk, right? I mean, she had Cheney backing her, which obviously Cheney's infamous with, of course, President George W. Bush, right? And getting involved in Iraq. So, a big reason, I know one of the big reasons, maybe the third or fourth reason that people voted for Trump was he doesn't want war. And one thing that did happen under him is that no war started, which was nice in his first election. And it's not only because we don't want war, a lot of people don't want our money going overseas. They don't want our money going to Israel. They don't want our money going to Ukraine. And Dave Smith, like him or not, he's a good, comedian and really he knows a lot about politics. I listened to him and there's a good book that is about to come out or just came out about Ukraine. And if anyone wants to know the true story on Ukraine, apparently this book is all about it. And it'll go into detail on how the US apparently, which has been said from the get-go, not only let it happen, but wanted it to happen. And we could have stopped it multiple times beforehand. And not only enticed Russia, but apparently we had stuff on the table in order to stop this from happening, and we would not go through with it. We would not come to an agreement. And now billions of dollars been sent over there. And of course, the reason that our country funnels billions of dollars to these countries is guess what? That money goes right back into the pockets of, guess it, Lockheed Martin, those type of companies, defense and arms companies here in the US. And so, you know, this whole thing of sending money overseas at the end of the day, it's really getting money, putting money back into the pockets of billionaires, putting money back into the pockets of corporations, and of course, those politicians that get paid by those companies. And so, for that reason, I think it's good to say, it's a good thing if he follows through with this. I've looked through some of his cabinet positions. I know one big thing is like Mike Pompeo. I heard he was talking about him, which would be a terrible choice because, of course, he's a war hawk. My big thing for Trump is trying to stay away from getting these people that have been in the system forever. It seems like he has at least some good people surrounding him now. Vivek, like it or not about Elon, we'll see what he has to do. I know a lot of people don't like Elon. It's kind of a love-hate thing there. We'll see what he's able to do. The Tulsi Gabbard choice, very interesting. And I read a lot of comments about how surprised all of his picks are, and it's like, yeah, they're surprised by how underwhelming and how, um, they don't have the requisites for the job, is what I was reading. And Tulsi has an interesting history, but one thing I do like about her as well is she's anti-war. She's pro, veterans benefits. I mean, she was pro paying for college and paying, and getting, healthcare and things for the people of Hawaii. So she's an interesting choice. I don't see how national intelligence, how she's going to be able to do that job. It's almost like Trump picked Matt Gaetz and these people to get denied just for his second choice or whoever that's going to be. Not too sure, but Pete Hegseth, another one, paid a woman who accused him of sexual assault. Um, is this along the same lines of Trump paying off? I forget what her name was. The prawn star. Uh, I just don't get it anymore. It's almost like a show. It's either you have people, all of these people in power are just terrible.
Hey there, St. Louis podcast listeners. We've got some exciting news from our friends over at Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Lee of Farmers Insurance.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for a job or to own your own business under a brand that everyone and their cousin is familiar with, Mark Lee with Farmers Insurance of St. Louis is recruiting insurance agency owners here in St. Louis for their Farmers Insurance Mentorship Program.
And as many of you are aware, Garrett and I have owned quite a few successful and award-winning businesses over the years. And in a past life, one of those was a farmer's insurance agency out of Chesterfield, Missouri.
Eric and I know firsthand how hard it is to start a business under a brand that no one has heard of and convince consumers and businesses to trust that you're an authority figure in your industry.
And as many of you know, we own an award-winning marketing firm, Vi Media, the one that Garrett was just discussing. And building that company's reputation literally took years. We're still building it to this day, and it's been 8 years in the making. However, with the Trusted Farmers Insurance Agency name on the building, we got started when we started our Farmers Insurance Agency. The trust was already built and has been for 96 years.
And if you can't do math, that means Farmers Insurance has been around since 1928. Luckily, you don't need to be a human calculator to get rich as an owner of your very own Farmers Insurance Agency.
Nope. All you have to do is reach out to the one and only Mark Lee, the leader of Farmers Insurance in the greater St. Louis metropolitan area.
That's right. So ensure he continues to sponsor our show and your favorite podcast, the St. Louis Podcast, by quitting your job today and calling Mark Lee. I wouldn't even wait for him to answer your call. Call your boss now, quit, and become your very own business owner.
Visit insurancecareerstl.com. That is insurancecareerstl.com. Should we spell it out?
Yes. It would
INSURANCE. Career, CAREER, STL.com. Insurancecareerstl.com. Go there now. Back to the podcast.
And wait. Insurancecareerstl.com.
Back to the podcast. All right, so we got Chris Wright. Who is this guy? Chris Wright. Nominate oil industry executive Chris Wright, CEO of Liberty Energy, 2024 campaign donor to lead the Department of Energy in his second term. Department oversees the country's energy supplies, such as research and development, nuclear power, 17 national laboratories, cleanup of Cold War era nuclear efforts. He'll also be on the newly formed Council of National Energy. So, the problem with this guy is he doesn't think that we're causing any sort of climate change, which, maybe we're not the only cause of it, but it definitely seems like we're speeding up the process. I think the Republicans should just come to that conclusion and agree with the consensus, because we see weather patterns changing in the United States and for the country. Is it a warming? Is it a cooling? Who cares? We're seeing weird weather patterns, stronger storms, and we know that it's due in part to climate change. Now, you are going to sit here and say, obviously, as an oil executive, right, that does fracking, there's no climate crisis. Okay. Wright denied the scientific consensus that man-made greenhouse gases are responsible for warming the planet. I think it is, right? Doesn't it have to? There's greenhouse gases. It's keeping some of the warmth in the planet, right? Doesn't it have to be the case? I feel like we learned this lesson in school somewhere in basic science. You'd think to see it, but I could be wrong. First, so it seems like he's picking a lot of people that aren't potentially good. Lee Zeldin is EPA. Like I said, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. Uh, Doug Burnham to be Secretary of Interior. He could be an issue uh, because, of course, he's going to be in charge of, federal lands. And that means with federal lands, he could start drilling wherever he wants. And I'm not necessarily opposed to drilling more in certain areas for energy independence. I think we should become I believe we are a net exporter instead of a next importer. I could be net importer. I could be wrong there. I don't know everything. Um, I think the pipeline was an interesting thing. We should have just rerouted it around, Indian lands or whatever, and made that work, or paid them a bunch of money to make it happen, whatever needed to be done there to make that work. Um, obviously lithium mining and things like that. So we'll see what's going to happen. Obviously, we don't want to just sell the interior and all of our lands. As I just got done saying, I went through Redwood State Park, Redwood National Park, Jedediah State Park. I don't want to see these areas get destroyed by corporations as well. So we'll have to see. It's going to be a fine line, with who is in power here. What is interesting, we have the first female chief of staff, Susie Wiles. That's good. It's interesting that we got Marco Rubio as Secretary of State nominated. Obviously, he does have some foreign policy experience. Um, so that's an interesting choice. But what was it, 8 years ago? Also get flamed by Trump, which is funny to look back on. So a lot of interesting stuff. One thing I will say: Robert F. Kennedy Jr., hate him or love him, I think that he could potentially do some good for food, because there's no argument that the food in the United States is significantly worse for you than, let's just say, most of Europe, right? A lot of the European countries have better food than the US, and that's because the US is allowed to put stuff in our food that those countries are not. And I think, I hope, I pray that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is actually going to get some stuff done, regardless of his thing about, you know, his vaccine and autism thing. Take it with a grain of salt. Fine. But listen to him and how he talks about food, how he talks about the, massive influx of prescriptions and just people, frankly, not being healthy in the United States. And you look at him, what is he, like 70 years old? 70 years old. He looks pretty damn healthy. And if he could be the voice of health and hopefully be the reasonable and good voice for health and hopefully make some good changes to make the United States healthier, I think that'll be a big win, an absolute big win. But, we'll see how that goes. We'll see where it goes. I had a lot of other stuff to talk about with this election, but I think we get it. Section 230 reform. I know people are worried about that with the FCC. What does Section 230 mean? What's going to happen there? It's tough to say. With Section 230, there's a few different things. It really just needs to be rewritten, right? So right now it's how does the social media platforms manage the how do they actually manage the content that's being posted on their platforms, right? How are they managing that? And the question is, just pulling up this where'd my article go? All right. Two key subsections. Section 230C1 protects platform from legal liability relating to harmful content posted on their sites by third parties. Section 230C2 allows platforms to police their sites for harmful content, but it doesn't require that they remove anything. It protects them from liability if they choose not to. Okay. So the question is, how liable are these platforms, or should they be liable? How should they moderate? I think this does need to be updated. Now, everyone's cause for concern is that underneath Trump, of course, them being the free speech people, now they're going to make it less applicable to have free speech on these platforms because if people are going to be posting fake, false information or any of those things, these companies potentially are going to have to and are going to be required to remove that information. If they don't remove that information, obviously they can potentially be liable for that stuff. Or it could go the other way. It could be the fact of, hey, this is the wild, wild west. Whatever is posted, you guys are not liable to remove that stuff. It is what it is. This stuff may be real or not. Doesn't matter. It's up to the user to figure that out. And the platform is not going to be liable. And maybe they'll remove, graphic images, or maybe they'll remove sexual content, or maybe they'll remove, X, Y, and Z. But at the end of the day, they are not liable. And it'll be the Wild West again on the internet, which it's like, will that be better? Will it be worse? It's really hard to say. Declaring that, so as a response to a 1995 court ruling declaring that platforms who policed any user engaging content on their sites should be considered publishers and therefore legally liable for all of the user generated content posted to their site. Well, I mean, Facebook and these companies aren't publishers, right? We're publishing to them. It's almost like a community board, if you will. So, Section 230 does need to be overhauled. The question is, how are they going to overhaul it in a way that's good for people and also good for the companies, the platforms themselves? Because it seems like we're misaligned right there. So, we'll see where that goes. Uh, it seemed lot. So even if social media platforms had minimal legal incentives to police their platform from harmful content, it seemed logical that they would do so out of economic self-interest to protect their valuable brands, right? Which is correct. That is why Reddit, what is it, 4 or 5 years ago, they got rid of almost all gore, a lot of the sexual content, a lot of pages on a lot of subreddits on Reddit that got flagged. There was like, and they were degenerate places. Sure. There was like a hate fag group, not, not safe for life. All of these different subreddits that were sharing content that from an advertiser's eyes, they would not want to have on their platform that they're advertising on, right? And I get that. I get it. Makes sense. Or does it? Does it matter? Do the I do I care if I'm Coca-Cola? Do I care that you guys are advertising on a subreddit on Reddit that is a gore subreddit, like Watch People Die or whatever? I know that used to be a big one back in the day. It's absolutely crazy content. I mean, it is literally exactly what it says it is. Now, obviously, from an advertiser's eyes, they'd be like, I don't want to be on that. And maybe there's a way to just say, hey, I don't, that's fine. We're just not going to have your ads on those platforms. But those people need Coca-Cola as well. And are the people, how would someone know that you're advertising on there without being on there? It doesn't make a lot of sense. YouTube, I mean, removed a lot of their stuff, a lot of its content, 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe even longer. I forget when that was, when, they had a big issue with advertisers being put on, channels that they didn't necessarily agree with, right? So then they got upset about that, and, YouTube and Google started cracking down on that stuff. So we'll have to see, really where this goes. Um, I'm curious. It needs to be updated. It hasn't been updated in forever. So let's see what happens. All right. Off of politics. I found this hilarious. Infosys founder defends call for 70-hour work week, says he doesn't believe in a work-life balance. So, co-founder, I'm not even going to say his name, is once again facing criticism for talking about the benefits of working every hour that you're awake. The Indian entrepreneur who previously called for young people to work 70-hour weeks has doubled down on a comment by stating he does not believe in work-life balance. This Indian CEO would bring back slaves if he could. Murthy suggested that young people work 12-hour days for the next 20 years, 50 years, whatever it is, out of a sense of duty to the nation and support future generations. He said Prime Minister Narendra Modi can work 100 hours per week, as do his cabinet ministers. Therefore, citizens should show their appreciation by doing the same. There's no way they're working that much. There's absolutely no way. I mean, this guy's so out of touch. Huge company. If I were using Infosys, it's an Indian multinational technology companies that offers business consulting, IT, blah blah blah. It's on the New York Stock Exchange. INFY is the symbol, and I am surprised that this stock did not tank after this news. Very interesting. Obviously, this dude's completely out of touch. Yeah, let me work 70 to 100 hours a week for your corporation. Makes sense, bud. It's not going to work. Not going to work. So we got that. Earthy seems to have an equal amount of hatred for taking weekends off as he does for spending a day not working until you pass out. He expressed his lament when companies moved from a 6-day work week to a 5-day work week in 1986. I was not very happy with it. I think in this country, we have to work very hard because there's no substitute for hard work, even if you're the most intelligent guy. All right, I sort of agree with that, but that doesn't mean you have to kill yourself working 100 or 70 hours a week. Murthy said that he used to go into the office at 6:20 a.m. every day and go home at 8:30 p.m., 14 hours a day for 6.5 days a week until he retired. When he asked if he regretted not spending more time with his children, he said quality is more important than quantity. And that the hour and a half or 2 hours he spent with the children at dinner when he returned home were lots of fun. So you're telling me you got home at 8:30. Hey Siri, I'm not talking to you. Jeez. When he asked if he regretted not spending, yeah, an hour or two at dinner. Home at 8:30, so your kids are up till 10:30? Whatever. Do the hours line up? Who cares? This guy's out of touch. Send him to the gulag. Almost 40% of Americans under 30 get their news from social media influencers. I wonder what they describe as a social media influencer because there are good YouTube channels. What does a social media influencer actually mean? We'll see if we can find that on here. Narrowing it down to 2,058 influencers. They're individuals who have a large following on social media and often post about news or political or social issues. Excluded any account that was part of an official news organization. Okay. Okay. The big names included right wingers Benny Johnson, Dinesh, Matt Walsh, Jack Posebic, Charlie Kirk. Liberals include Brian Tyler Cohen, Ashley Judge, Heather Cox Richardson. I don't I'm familiar with the name Matt Walsh. I don't Charlie Kirk. I'm familiar with Charlie. Charlie Kirk's he's the big guy that goes and does live right things at like colleges and things like that. Yeah, Turning Point USA. He's interesting. He has some good points, I guess, but also he's a political pundit. I find him annoying. An overwhelming 85% of the influencers in the study had a presence on X. There's been a huge exodus of liberals who are fed up with X after the election. Wow. 50% of the popular influencers had a presence on Instagram. then YouTube, Facebook. So X is by far 85% of the influencers on X, then 50 on Instagram, 44 on YouTube, etc. Roughly 63% of the influencers were men, 30% were women, rest non-binary, non-gender, whatever. I mean, where are we supposed to get our news from? ABC? We know that they're corporate media bought and paid for. You have to go and find the news. There's a ton of different things that I pay attention to. Morning Brew is one, but there's a ton of different platforms. There's a ton of different people that you can find um, that will actually go over legitimate news. If it's one way or the other, and the big thing is to find people that talk about both, right? Or if you listen to one person, find someone that's on the other side of the aisle as well. That way you can at least get two good points of. But there's a lot of, news things now where you can go and see the news. It'll tell you if it's like conservative or if it's liberal, how those news organizations are funded and things like that. So there's obviously a ton of independent, like Matt Taibbi, a ton of independent journalists and things like that. So there's a lot of good ways to get news. And I'm not going to 40% of Americans say under 30 get news from social media influencers. Does this even matter? I don't know if it does. Sure, some of the influencers are bullshit. So is ABC, NBC, CNN, etc. Fox, right? All right, last thing before we get out of here. What else do we got? That's all we got. That's all we got for today. As always, like, review, subscribe, leave a comment if you enjoyed the podcast. If you disagreed with me, if you agreed with me, whatever, let me know in the comments. I'm not here to argue with anyone. Thought it was an interesting election. Interesting how things have turned out. We'll see, how the next 4.5 or so years go. If things get better, if things get worse, if things stay the same, right? Of course, we're here in Half Coast Studios. If you're in St. Louis, you can go to halfcoaststudios.com. You can record here. You can have them distribute. You can have them mix your audio. You can have them post. They do a lot of stuff for you here. So reach out to them at halfcoaststudios.com. As always, Vi Media, the best damn marketing company on this planet. If you're a business owner, a marketing executive, and you want to just talk, you want to consult, or if you want to know how well you're doing when it comes to digital marketing, we will give you a free audit and a free marketing plan. We will go in depth. If you have current ads going, if you have current SEO going, social media, the first thing we want to do is let you know how well you're doing now. And that's where every good marketing company should start. How are you doing now? What are your goals? Where do you want to be? Okay, let's see. Is this working? Is this not working? How do we improve this? Or maybe it's working really well and you should stick to what you're doing. So reach out to us at vi.media. Of course, you can message myself, Eric Kempf Brown, across pretty much all platforms. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Hey there, St. Louis podcast listeners. We've got some exciting news from our friends over at Farmers Insurance of St. Louis, led by the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Lee of Farmers Insurance.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for a job or to own your own business under a brand that everyone and their cousin is familiar with, Mark Lee with Farmers Insurance of St. Louis is recruiting insurance agency owners here in St. Louis for their Farmers Insurance Mentorship Program.
And as many of you are aware, Garrett and I have owned quite a few successful and award-winning businesses over the years. And in a past life, one of those was a farmer's insurance agency out of Chesterfield, Missouri.
Eric and I know firsthand how hard it is to start a business under a brand that no one has heard of and convince consumers and businesses to trust that you're an authority figure in your industry.
And as many of you know, we own an award-winning marketing firm, Vi Media, the one that Garrett was just discussing. And building that company's reputation literally took years. We're still building it to this day, and it's been 8 years in the making. However, with the Trusted Farmers Insurance Agency name on the building, we got started when we started our Farmers Insurance Agency. The trust was already built and has been for 96 years.
And if you can't do math, that means Farmers Insurance has been around since 1928. Luckily, you don't need to be a human calculator to get rich as an owner of your very own Farmers Insurance Agency.
Nope. All you have to do is reach out to the one and only Mark Lee, the leader of Farmers Insurance in the greater St. Louis metropolitan area.
That's right. So ensure he continues to sponsor our show and your favorite podcast, the St. Louis Podcast, by quitting your job today and calling Mark Lee. I wouldn't even wait for him to answer your call. Call your boss now, quit, and become your very own business owner.
Visit insurancecareerstl.com. That is insurancecareerstl.com. Should we spell it out?
Yes. It would
INSURANCE, career, CAREER, STL.com, insurancecareerstl.com. Go there now. Back to the podcast.
And wait, insurancecareerstl.com.
Back to the podcast.